Well, good morning. Here we are. Daniela Bass. I'm the Director of the Division for Inclusive Social Development of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. As you might know, this department is the focal point for the whole United Nations system globally, therefore, on family. And I thank very much Renata, who is an amazing staff of this department working in the division I have the honor to lead, who is the focal point on the family. I see also many familiar faces here. I'm very glad to see you on board, and the new ones with whom I hope there will be a chance to familiarize later on. This department, through the division I lead, is also the focal point on social groups that are members of the family. And I'm talking about youth globally, older persons globally, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities. And recently also, we have the mandate about sport for peace and development. And we do know that sport and physical activities played a very important role, even when it comes to uniting families, and sometimes maybe some healthier antagonism as well. If, well, I'm Italian, as you can guess from my accent, you like one soccer team more than another one, then it can be a very, very energetic and dynamic conversation at home. But besides that, family homelessness, as you know, is the priority theme of the Commission for Social Development. We really have to engage all together, various stakeholders, and see why this happens, if it can be prevented, and what can be the solutions. Some solutions were already brought to the table by some countries. I think of Finland, for instance. But other solutions might be brought to the table by local authorities, as it has happened, but also by NGOs and the private sector and many other actors that are working around this issue. As I said these days, and I will repeat it here too, and apologies for those who have already heard this, home can be defined in many different ways. Each culture might have a different concept of what a home is and what being homeless means. Since in the division I lead, there are also indigenous peoples included and indigenous issues, I would like to remember everyone that home for some of these indigenous groups are forests. Once we remove the trees from those forests, those indigenous groups become homeless. They don't have a home. So that's why I'm saying let's not think of a home just made out of bricks. There are many ways of having a home or losing a home. This was just to trigger in you really a different way also of looking at, in a transversal way, not just about what we think is a home. The reasons why we become homeless are very many. If you're a woman in many parts of the world and you lose your husband, you might not be able to inherit anything and you become homeless. With your kids, if you have children. And so I thank you very much, you and women, for being on board when it comes to the organization of this event. But then when it comes to families and policies and developing good policies for families, well, I cannot think but IFFD. So Ignacio and other colleagues, we have been collaborating for a long time together. Thank you very much. But then there are also, we also have to have hope when we look at the horizon ahead of us. So Safe Horizon, thank you very much for your support. And the NGO Committee on the Family and the Ciudad de Sao Paulo, but the DOE Fund and Ready, Willing and Able. I like the able. I tend to leave the D's at home and bring here only the able, D's ability, D's, and I like to bring abilities here, not the D's. So thank you very much for being willing and able. as we all are. And all the others who have contributed, including UNANIMA International, to this event. Sergey, you are late. You are late.
I was sitting behind you.
Sergey used to be a colleague of ours in the division where I'm now the director many years ago before I joined. So we have a very good relationship. This is beautiful. You see, this is family. I don't feel homeless when I come to the United Nations. I have a beautiful family here and the roof on my head. So natural disasters and how we can prevent them. A natural disaster can destroy your home and you become homeless in a matter of well. So let's try to prevent violence for people. And there are so many other different entry points, particularly when we think of families moving towards urban areas. More and more this is going to happen. And what happens, therefore, to those families who remain in the rural areas if there are no infrastructures, et cetera, that could also cause some families to become homeless for different reasons. And then I don't want to go into the definition because we don't need a definition of family. I think that each country has its own definition of family, or each of us. But what happens to those people who, growing old, might lose most of their relatives and they might end up losing their homes. They become homeless. So in a world that demographically is becoming older and older, we already know that there are more older people than young people in the world. The only continent that it is still very young is Africa. But all these young people in Africa in the next 30 years will become senior. So what's going to happen to Africa? Let's think about giving a home, whatever home is for all of us, to everyone. So how to prevent people to have to suffer that lack of dignity, not having a home, and what kinds of solutions we can give. Well, I'm here to listen, and I would like to, therefore, give the floor to the first of our panelists. We have an amazing panel today. I would like to start with the first speaker, and whom I had already the pleasure to meet quite a few times. And I'm talking about Dr. Bahira Trask, who is a professor, as well as the chair of Human Development and Family Science at the University of Delaware. I would encourage you all to look at the bios of our colleagues and friends and panelists in the websites and in other means that they have been distributing to you, so that we save the time to actually listen to their thoughts, being thought leaders on these topics. Thank you very much. Please. I'll try to be a little bit strict with the time. So I think that, Renata, we have about 7 minutes. More than about, actually, I'm going to use my phone. So at the 6th minute, I'll let you know that you have 1 minute to wrap up. Thank you. I will do it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. And thank you to Ms. Daniela Bas for the lovely introduction and for inviting me, and to Ms. Renata Kazmierska and Ignacio Solias for inviting me. So we have an incredibly important topic on our hands, because most people are actually not aware that we are at a crisis situation, and the crisis is growing. So to start off, I want to point out that most of us in this room are middle class or upper class, and we're in the West. And if you're in that category, homelessness or losing your house is not usually something that you are thinking about. We take for granted the centrality of good housing, and when we move by choice. And maybe we think, oh, we can't move into this neighborhood because the house is a little more expensive, but that's about it. But when you don't have good housing, it impacts every aspect of your life, and specifically it affects family life. And then, as we know, homelessness is now linked with a long list of problems, especially for child development. And we will get more into that, including abuse, separation, that sort of thing. So housing is absolutely fundamental to family well-being in many different ways. The actual home where you live, however that's defined, as well as your neighborhood conditions. However, like I started out, we have a crisis on our hands. There is a report that just came out from the World Economic Forum that over 90% of cities around the world do not provide adequate or affordable housing for their residents. And now in 32 major cities around the world, home prices grew by almost a quarter, by almost 25% just over the last 5 years. Meanwhile, income only rose by 8%. What is happening around the world, my area of research is around globalization and the well-being of families. And what has happened is that housing and a home used to be a public social good. It was understood that everybody should have some kind of home to live in, be it an apartment, whatever, shelter, whatever. But increasingly, housing has become a means for a small group of people to accumulate great wealth. And it has become unaffordable for many others. And this is growing. So I want to give you just a small example. For example, this just came out last year from Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the median household that rents spends 47%. So think about that. They spend half of their income on housing. And the average renter paid $1,700 per month. Meanwhile, the average household makes $40,000 a year. So just do the math on that. What's happening is wages are not rising in the same way that housing is rising. We have more and more people who need housing, and zoning laws increasingly favor luxury housing and single-family homes. I live in an area, very middle-class area. You cannot have more than one family living in a home. You're not even allowed to rent it out in any form. The other issue that people have not, it hasn't completely, especially I think here in the United States, completely kind of entered people's consciousness is Airbnb and other short-term forms of home renting initiatives. What is happening is through these short-term home initiatives, we have fewer and fewer housing units that are available, especially for rent, and that's driving up the rents on those that are available. This is particularly happening in tourist areas around the world. So I just wanted to give you an example of Barcelona, Spain. Look at the rise in tourism in 8 years. In 2000, 3 million tourists. By 2018, 30 million tourists. Meanwhile, the population is $1.6 million. And there has been a 50% rent increase for the residents of that city. So what is happening is people can't afford to stay where they are, so they move to the outskirts of the city. This is happening in Lisbon also. I want to give you a personal quick example. I have a friend. She is the chancellor of a university in Greece. I visited her 4 years ago. She has a lovely 2-story apartment near the beach, I visited her this summer, and she had moved, and she's the chancellor of a university, and she's living in a rented room of someone that she knows, and she put her lovely apartment on Airbnb. I said, why did you do this? She said, because I can make money off it. In Florence, now 1 in 5 properties is a short-term rental. So these are staggering statistics. When we look at other parts of the world, we also have the issue of substandard housing. So in India and China, approximately 25% of the population lives in housing where there's not electricity, running water, sort of very sub conditions. The same is true in sub-Saharan Africa, where more than half of the population lives in substandard housing. The problem is that these are areas that are easily then taken over. What's happening is that there are real estate groups that are going around the world, and they're targeting these areas, buying them up, and then either holding onto them or turning them into hotels, luxury resorts, that sort of thing. And that leads to the displacement of the populations that are there. According to this World Economic Report that just came out, the prediction is by 2050, 2.5 billion people are going to live in substandard housing. This is why I say we have a real crisis on our hands. Living in substandard housing also is a public health crisis. There are many studies that if you don't live in a house or in a home where there is good ventilation, running water, all of this sort of thing, that you are susceptible to all kinds of illnesses. And this is especially true for children, individuals with disabilities, and older people. So just one statistic about the WHO estimates that about 235 people suffer from asthma related to where they live. So this is in direct contradiction with the SDG that says to ensure access for all is important. What can we do? Well, there's a lot of things that can happen. The first is we need to move, the focus has shifted from individuals and families as having being the center of housing policies. Instead, we've moved to market domination. The market rules about what is happening. So governments and states need to redesign laws and policies that put housing at the center of family life. This is a human rights issue, in my opinion, and there are a whole variety of initiatives that could help solve this problem, including revitalizing neighborhoods, promoting job growth, linking job seekers with suburban employment opportunities, and that sort of thing. Also, we need laws that discourage the conversion of homes into hotelization. I just want to say for the record, historically, the housing sector and the hotel sector did not meet at all. This is a brand new phenomenon. This is just something that has happened in the last couple of years. I have a list in my slides, because I'm out of time, of initiatives. There are things happening all over the world that are these are sort of positive initiatives that are trying to solve this housing issue, including in Germany, in Denmark, in Mexico, and in England. Thank you very much.
It was such a rich, really presentation. I loved it. Thank you so much.
It was supposed to be 12. I thought I had 12 minutes, so I zoomed.
Well, but then there is the conversation that we can engage with. So thank you very much. So we saw here also some examples at the very end of what some private groups are doing to make sure that their employees actually find affordable housing, not to have maybe to commute 3 hours back and forth to go to work every day, because if houses become so expensive, then people move towards the urban area, the suburbs, and this has an impact on the family lifestyle as well.
May I give you one example? In San Francisco, the median price of a home now is $1.6 million.
But when I would like to say when we redesign houses, particularly in a world that is becoming more and more old in terms of population, we should really make sure that besides building new houses, these houses are accessible, not only in terms of money, but if I think also of persons with disabilities, we could have 1 million houses, but if they have steps and they're not accessible, then those people with certain kinds of disabilities cannot use those houses. So they are obliged to be homeless, if you think of that. I'm saying that because for me, to find a house which is accessible is always a nightmare. Now, sorry if I brought in it something a little bit more personal, but trust me, it's a real issue. And talking about homelessness in New York City, I would like now Renata, which list shall I follow? That I'm a little bit confused here. Sorry.
So we can follow
the Senior Director of Domestic Violence and Shelters.
homelessness in New York City.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Now, imagine that all of this happened behind the scenes, so we come back now to the event. I would like now to... I would like to ask Mr. Matthew Windram, who is the Director of Government Affairs of the Doe Fund, to talk about homelessness in New York. Thank you.
No, thank you. And oh, here we go. Are we on? All right. No, thank you very much, and thanks Renata for hosting this. Matthew Windrum, I'm Director of Government Affairs at a nonprofit organization here in New York that works to break cycles of homelessness, addiction, and criminal recidivism. So I'll talk just a little bit about that, a little bit about homelessness here in New York. Thanks also first to Ryan Coe from the LDS Church, who I think put my name in the running for this. I really appreciate that, Ryan, and all that you do on these and other issues. And a very quick mention that for me, being back at the UN is a homecoming of sorts. I worked for 13 years at the British Consulate General right around the corner here. I was there for so long that, among other things that I did, I advocated and tried to grow support for then Prime Minister David Cameron's objective of securing an EU-US free trade agreement. That did not work out very well. But beyond that, I'm here a little bit to talk about what we do to break those cycles. And first, I'll give you very briefly statistics on homelessness here in New York City. I don't think many of you will need a reminder, but there are 63,000 homeless people here in municipal shelters across New York City, including 22,000 children and 15,000 families. Roughly 70% of these residents in city shelters are families with children. The trends are not particularly good either. The number of homeless New Yorkers sleeping each night in municipal shelters is now 62% higher than it was 10 years ago. Clearly, this is a problem that cries out for a solution. But at the Doe Fund, we think any discussion of homelessness has to also touch upon another uniquely American crisis, the problem of over-incarceration. U.S. penal population, as some of you may know, increased 500% over the 4 decades since the 1970s, ultimately reaching around 2.3 million. This is by far the largest incarcerated population of any country and encompasses around 1/4 of all the incarcerated across the world. If America's incarcerated were a city, it would be the 5th largest in the U.S., just a bit shy of Houston, Texas. With nearly 1 out of every 100 U.S. adults in prison or jail, the incarceration is 5 to 10 times higher than the rates in other Western democracies. Minorities, of course, are most impacted. People of color make up 37% of the U.S. population, but fully 67% of the incarcerated population. And we know incarceration really exacerbates homelessness. One study of 5 million formerly incarcerated people found that they were 10 times more likely to be homeless than the general population. And countless thousands of New Yorkers have experienced incarceration. Roughly 25,000 are discharged from New York State prisons every year, joining 68,000 that are released from city correctional facilities. 4,000 people are paroled homeless each year in New York City alone. This has all created a terrible revolving door that ejects individuals from the mainstream economy and shuffles them between prison cells and shelter beds. Various studies have, of course, shown the profound impact having incarcerated parents might have on children. And again, you'll find people of color are hardest hit by this. African American and Hispanic children are far more likely than white children or non-white Hispanic children to have incarcerated parents. The good news, after all that sobering stuff, is that there is a growing bipartisan acceptance of the need to address, and in some cases reverse, the excesses of the late 20th century tough-on-crime era. New York State started turning the tide by reforming some draconian laws called the Rockefeller drug laws about 11 years ago, and came through with another substantial package of reforms earlier this year. Federal government, of course, came across with the bipartisan First Step Act back in 2018, and other states have been pursuing their own reforms. We can reasonably expect that if the pace of reform continues, it is at least possible that we may see more and more people discharged from prison. Currently, 600,000 are released per year. But this is where we come in at the Doe Fund. We do 2 very important things. If you're at least 18-year-old, you're male, you're homeless, you're able-bodied and otherwise capable of undertaking work, we offer Ready, Willing, and Able, a 9 to 12-month program that integrates paid work, occupational training, and holistic support services to facilitate a successful return from homelessness and incarceration to mainstream society. If that program isn't right for you, perhaps because you're not able-bodied or have a serious mental health condition that precludes you from working, we offer 5 permanent and affordable and supportive housing developments across the Bronx, Manhattan, and Brooklyn, with 6 more in the pipeline in various stages of development. I'll speak very briefly about the Ready, Willing, and Able program in particular, which works to give homeless men, 72% of whom are criminal justice system involved, the tools they need to find full-time work and secure permanent housing. Operating out of our 3 transitional shelters here in New York, the heart of the program is paid traditional work, the opportunity to go to work to earn money from a participant's first day in the program, complemented by personalized case management and social services, education, career development training, and lifelong alumni services. One thing I would like to emphasize is that from the very first paycheck, there's a mandation that they start paying child support. We know that having a family infrastructure support system or rebuilding one is critical to successful reentry and successful reentry from both incarceration and homelessness. So we see these mandatory child support payments as helping facilitate that. They begin then undertaking a number of vocational training projects, which can range from pest control to building and maintenance to infrastructure repair to logistics, which we think will make them more employable in rather recession-proof industries that also wind up with some license of some sort, which makes them most employable. Skipping ahead just a bit, because I know we're short on time. In the final months of the program, they participate in dress rehearsal-style mock interviews with corporate volunteers and begin to link with over 400 employer partners that we have. Housing specialists help identify and connect them to self-supported permanent housing, thereby removing themselves from our shelters. Studies have concluded that this program reduces recidivism dramatically. The New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services reported that RWA reduced the 3-year felony conviction rate of formerly incarcerated graduates by 62%. But drowning you in statistics isn't really enough to feel the full impact of the program. I think it's more palpable when you consider the case of 54-year-old Thomas Hooker, who had dealt with addiction, homelessness, and occasional incarceration for 30 years. He came through our program, and with his hard work and some support from our program, he recently celebrated 2 years of sobriety. He reunited with his mother for Thanksgiving for the first time in 30 years, and with his children for the first time in 21 years. It's those kind of stories, and the faces we see on our annual cap and gown celebration when 100 or 200 men celebrate, their families are there, assorted elected officials are there. I think that's what really makes the difference. I'll close on what I think will be an ultimately positive note. I came on board with the Doe Fund early last year, shortly after taking a British minister to see 2 of the New York City jail complexes on a best practice, as it were, exchange visit. These were Rikers Island and the Manhattan Detention Complex. For many years, I knew about the demographic imbalances in these sorts of situations and about the harsh conditions, but to see them firsthand was a particularly striking experience. It was hard to come away from that not knowing that it was hard to come away from that not understanding that we got something horribly wrong as a society. I was therefore very excited to come on board in what seemed like a bipartisan moment for criminal justice reform, in which both Democrats, as you might expect, and Republicans who had joined in understanding that there were time for a change. And that shortly upon that, I'll be done in 30 seconds. Shortly after that, a number of more formidable reforms were accomplished at state level. So that was good to see. I think we might be on the precipice of something similar here in New York on homelessness. The governor is making great progress on ensuring that the state establishes 62,000 permanent affordable homes. The mayor has pledged in a recent holistic plan to end street homelessness as we know it. And if you're going to be a serious candidate to succeed him, it seems like you have to come forward with a plan of your own. So I think ultimately, engagement from top policymakers is what we most need to ensure that we have durable success going forward. And I think we have that now, and it's a credit to them. And if we work hard enough, we can ensure that in 10 or 15 years, New Yorkers look back at this time as the time we really started making a difference on the issue. Sorry for going 2 minutes over.
You bought 2 minutes because of your passion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I would like now to, indeed, the issue of prisons is an issue, and how this impacts families whose members are in prison, or when you leave the prison, if you still have a family or not, then it's really serious. And later on, we will have also another perspective from another important city, but one by one. Now I would like to give the floor to Miss Molly Jerky. So it depends on the nationality. How do I pronounce Gerke? Who is the executive assistant and assistant UN representative of UNANIMA International. The rest you can find, as I said, in the bios that have been distributed. Lots of experience, particularly on women and girls and children. We would like you to share with us some thoughts about family violence, which is another very important, about the experience of women and children. As I said, you have experience in these specific areas, and how this impacts in becoming homeless, but then how we can prevent it, and if there are solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you for inviting UNANIMA International to be part of this wonderful event. So UNANIMA International is an organisation made up of 22 communities of women religious globally, with a commitment to advocating, achieving and maintaining long-term dignity and positive outcomes for all, especially families experiencing or who have experienced homelessness or displacement. In recent years, we've taken the approach to advocacy through research, with a strong focus on in-depth research into family homelessness, specifically that of women, children and girls. Since its launch in 2018, we have put significant effort into quantitative and qualitative research, such as bringing the voices of women, children and girls with a lived experience to the UN. We are lucky enough to have 2 of these voices with us presenting throughout the week during this commission. Among our immediate findings was a significant documentation of family homelessness being a social problem affecting families around the world. Families homelessness is highly gendered. In the United States alone, women represent 6 of the 10 adults counted as experiencing homelessness with families with children in the 2019 point-in-time data. While the statistics differ, evidence of family homelessness affecting women and girls disproportionately is a global phenomenon. It is clear that women, children and girls experiencing homelessness remain among the most vulnerable populations, whose situation is often exacerbated by their distinct lack of access to social protection, public services, and support. Understood and manifesting in a diverse economic, social, cultural, and even linguistic context globally, it is unfortunately poorly documented across the board. Earlier this week, UNANIMA International had the pleasure of launching 2 research publications on family homelessness. These will be able to be found on our website very soon. The first, titled Hidden Faces of Homelessness, International Research on Families, is a publication which looks at family homelessness through an in-depth case studies of 4 countries. And the second, Family Homelessness Through the Lens of the 2030 Agenda, which analyses family homelessness through the lens of the 2030 Agenda, the SDGs, and human rights. Each of the publications features insights from experts, service providers, and people with a lived experience, giving us a holistic look at the issue of family homelessness with a special focus on women, children, and girls. Documented in our research, throughout the experience of homelessness, it is clear that this population face unique challenges, many of which cause the individual and or their families to experience financial, social, and emotional or even physical trauma, many of these having significant ramifications throughout the individual's lifestyle. We would like to share with you just 2 quotes from some of the women and children who have contributed to our research. A young woman from the Pacific said, "During this time, sometimes I would sit by myself thinking about my house, that food we ate, clothes that we wore, and wishing I could return quickly back to my island. Every day I felt sad because of the situation we're living in." The second is from an older woman in the US. Even through my homelessness, it hurts me even more seeing women there with their children homeless. It's horrible, it's really horrible. As we've heard throughout the Commission, homelessness can be visible, where people are living on the streets, or invisible, where people are living in shelters and or non-permanent settlements or situations. It is often this second category that women, children and girls fall into, as they tend to seek shelter from friends, family, relatives and acquaintances when they become homelessness, only using homeless services when informal options have been exhausted. With such a disparity between the homeless definitions, this type of homelessness is often left behind, in turn creating significant issues. Mounting evidence across Europe suggests that definitions that exclude hidden homelessness have led to systematic underestimation of the extent of female homelessness and consequently a neglect of gender issues, both in terms of policy and service design. For this reason, we recommend that the inclusive definition put forward by the expert group in Nairobi, Kenya, be adopted globally. Family is the fundamental societal unit for all modern societies. They are the base from which we learn to communicate, emphasise, compromise, and adapt within vital social structures. The importance of family is reflected in many national public policies. These policies play an important role in national and international efforts, as well as goals laid out in official United Nations documents. Echoed by various member states during the Commission and the former Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, families contribute significantly to social progress. They can be the key to finding the most effective route to achieving sustainable development, as they have the potential to break the problematic cycles that can hinder it. Combating the issue of family homelessness is undoubtedly integral in achieving sustainable development. In 1995, we made 10 commitments, which addressed among them the eradication of absolute poverty, gender equality, and the promotion of social integration. Inherently intertwined with addressing homelessness, these commitments have sparked significant action towards sustainable development thus far. Preceded by the 2030 Agenda, this landmark document identified vulnerable groups which to this day remain the furthest left behind, begging the question, have we done enough? In the 2030 Agenda's Decade for Action, we are called to look back on all that has been achieved and look forward still to what must be addressed. The Copenhagen Declaration put sustainable development on the map, and at the age of 25, these commitments are as relevant as ever. While progress has been made, we still have a long way to go. Achieving the UN's 2030 Agenda and ensuring we are upholding the commitments detailed in the Copenhagen Declaration requires the addressing of family homelessness, a subject that has thus far been overlooked, de-emphasised and misunderstood. The eradication of homelessness is integral in achieving sustainable development and ensuring individuals and families are able to fully enjoy the human rights they are entitled to. Among many actions, what is needed to be taken in order to ensure its eradication is a dialogue that promotes the view of treating homelessness as what it is. Firstly, a human rights and civil rights issue, and secondly, one that is structural and systematic. The need for a paradigm shift is evident and long overdue. It is only when we come together with one common voice that we will ensure a future that is just for all people and the planet. With this in mind, among many recommendations detailed in our recent publication, we would just like to highlight a few things that we would like to see. In the interest of time, I won't talk about all of them, but just highlight them. Member states adhering to the commitments they have made, the promotion of gender and family-sensitive policies, increased social protection flaws, housing first with supports. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for reminding us about the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the World Summit on Social Development that took place in 1995, known as Copenhagen Plus 25, that opened the doors for the very first time to the issue of women. And that prepared the path for what 6 months later took place in China, Beijing, known as Beijing 25. So we really have to be very thankful to the World Summit on Social Development that took place in Copenhagen. And in that report, if you go back and read the report of 25 years ago, they were so visionary. Homelessness is there in many, many parts of the report. Technology and how technologies could and will impact the various social groups that are particularly vulnerable. So do go back, read that report that was prepared 25 years ago, but then it inspired the 8 Millennium Development Goals, and nowadays we have 17 goals to be reached, hopefully, by the year 2030. And those goals have been inspired again by the World Summit on Social Development of 1995. So there is so much that we can still do together. Thank you very much for mentioning that. And now we ask another gentle lady. We have gentlemen, and then do we want to create a new word, the gentle lady or something like that? Mm-hmm. Women are gentle, right?
Yes.
So I would like to ask Miss Shaniqua
Yes.
And Holiday to talk about family violence and homelessness. You have an incredible experience, but today you're here in your role as a director of domestic violence shelters for a Safe Horizon. So please share with us what is your experience, what are the solutions, and what we can do to prevent violence and these kind of victims that then have to suffer, in addition, also homelessness, and how that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, for the nice introduction, and thank you, Renata, for coordinating for Safe Horizon to be able to contribute to this event, and all of you for coming here. Safe Horizon is the largest victims assistance organization in the United States, servicing over 250,000 children, adults, and families affected by crime and abuse throughout New York City each year. Safe Horizon's mission is to provide support, prevent violence, and promote justice for victims of crime and abuse, their families and communities, and move victims of violence from crisis to confidence. We operate 8 domestic violence shelter programs throughout the 5 boroughs, and we are in the process of opening a 9th. Of those current 8 domestic violence shelters that we operate, 6 of them are emergency shelters, which are comprised of apartments, communal living spaces, and safe dwellings. Within these 6 emergency shelters, there are 457 beds that service 195 families, and there are 2 transitional shelters that are comprised of single-family apartments. And within the Tier 2 or transitional shelters, we have 253 beds that serve 80 families. So we offer a plethora of services to our families in shelter at Safe Horizon, the approximately 300 families that we serve, and that includes comprehensive case management services that are delivered by staff that are trained in client-centered practice and use a trauma-informed perspective. We connect clients to resources and providers in the community. We offer empowerment groups, including DV support groups, economic empowerment workshops. We even offer transportation assistance, which includes Metro cards for public transportation to appointments, cabs as needed for safe transport to like court appearances, important appointments to transport like their items into storage if they have too many items, and transition into different placements that we might place them in after their stay with us. We offer social and healing activities, nutrition assistance, assistance with education, assistance with employment, search and access to employment opportunities. Also assistance with access to independent housing through our connection with the New York City Human Resources Administration, realtors in the community, and our team of skilled housing specialists. So in our work with survivors of abuse, we observe that they often face challenges around homelessness and access to adequate housing. These challenges are often connected to the abuse that they suffer. So when considering the intersectionality of domestic violence, homelessness, and challenges to access adequate housing, Black and Hispanic women are representative of a significant portion of those that face these challenges. In 2019, of the total 837 families that were housed in Safe Horizon shelters throughout the year, 62% of these families identified as Black and 35% identified as Hispanic. Some of the factors that contribute to the housing challenges faced by women in our program include a shortage of accessible, affordable housing, of course, credit issues, sometimes as a result of the financial abuse. So we've had clients that we know abuse is not just physical. It could be psychological, it could be emotional, it could be financial, and sometimes the abuser has ruined their credit on purpose and the credit of the children, just making them not able to move forward with anything that requires having good credit. Limited income, possibly due to not having employment because they were oppressed in that area by the abuser, or they left their employment for reasons related to the abuse, like they couldn't go to work, or just from coming into shelter and having that be a barrier to them like operating in their employment. So trauma reactions are a huge barrier to clients following through with the housing process in our experience. For example, a client can have apprehension or nervousness about, following through with the housing process, separation issues related to leaving shelter and transitioning into independence. I can give an example of that. There was one client about a year ago, and she had apprehension throughout the whole process of getting this independent housing through the voucher that we offer each of our clients through the New York City Human Resources Administration. And she got to the end of the process, and all was left was to get the keys and move in. And she opted not to move into the apartment, but to take her child and move in with her sister in Long Island, who had a home, because the previous time that she had endured this process and moved into the apartment, she suffered abuse again and ended up being evicted. And so she was that close to being successful in obtaining independent housing, and she opted out of it. So we have to take a client-centered approach and meet clients where they are, and sometimes people are just not ready due to the trauma reactions. Reflection on past experiences, like I just gave an example of, past experiences of independent living that may not have been a good experience for them. So that can be a barrier that's a result of a trauma reaction. In Safe Horizon shelters, we help the clients address these challenges by using some of the following strategies. We prep the clients for housing interviews. We engage them in role-playing activities that include scripts with the case manager, of course, and dialogues to prepare for the conversations with the landlords, just so that they're comfortable using their own voice, and give them, the skills to have that conversation. During these interactions, we help the clients prepare around their physical presentation, what they feel comfortable. If they need clothing to wear to the interviews, we help them with that as well. Answering difficult questions from landlords about credit history or past evictions and things like that, things that normally come up in an interview when you're trying to get an apartment, and other factors of the interview process. We help clients prepare for the housing process with helpful tips around standing out from other prospective tenants. I'm going to move through this quickly because I have 1 minute left. We conduct support groups that give clients the opportunity to discuss topics with their peers, such as triggers, past experiences, economic empowerment programming that helps them hands-on address their credit issues, credit repair and monitoring, and housing workshops where they can pool opportunities and resources. sorry. And we also understand the need to provide staff with tools to adequately assist the clients. So we make sure that our staff are trained in systems and processes, best practices. They have a handbook so that they can have something to refer to. And managing expectations around what the client is going to do and what the staff will contribute. Another group that I wanted to touch on before I'm done is a group of domestic violence survivors that are single women. And so Safe Horizon operates the domestic violence hotline for the entire city of New York. So that means all of the domestic violence shelters in New York City we link clients to them. So that's even clients that come from other countries. We've had clients call in, as long as they don't mind being connected to a shelter in New York City, then we can house them, other states, everything. And so we have a challenge housing single women or single survivors of domestic violence because most of the shelters in the New York City domestic violence system are set up for families. And so the way the spaces are designed, they're designed for families and they reimburse shelters per night, per bed, or in tier 2 shelters it's per family, per night. So there's a bill that's currently being considered in Albany called the Single Differential Bill. And what's important about this bill is it authorizes the OCFS agency to provide full reimbursement to domestic violence shelter programs if they downsize the space of a 1+1 family to accommodate a single person. They would still get paid the full reimbursement, which allows us to open up our spaces to more people so that they can get access to the voucher to be transitioned into independent housing. So I feel like the passing of that, and Safe Horizon is in support of that bill currently. I also co-chair the policy committee for Safe Horizon, and so we're in favor of that bill, along with increased funding for domestic violence shelter programs, more independent housing options and programs for individuals seeking housing with government-funded vouchers. All of those things combined would be of a great benefit to survivors of domestic violence who are seeking housing.
This was a very pragmatic presentation with the situations and solutions. So thank you very much. Really good practices brought to the table and for discussion. You said something about assistance with education. I would like later on, maybe there is a possibility to know what kind of education can be provided to children in these families that are suffering for temporary or a little bit more long-term homelessness situations. And it was also very interesting for me to hear about what you are providing to adults in terms of education, life learning education, like, skills such as interpersonal skills, how to relate to people, how to present situations, how to empower them through self-confidence. And all of these are soft skills, actually, where very often not much space is given. When we think of education, we think of the classic way of educating people, but actually providing tools to strengthen our soft skills, particularly when we go through such traumatic situations, is very important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sao Paulo. I went to Sao Paulo a couple of years ago. Huge city, very difficult to manage, and yet there are quite interesting, and you will hear now experiences and suggestions. You will hear now what's happening in Sao Paulo, in Brazil, from Mr. Sorry, my pronunciation is Italian, Luis Alvaro Salles Aguiar de Menezes. Thank you. Who has a huge history of activities in the world of relations and books and studies and marketing and business. But right now, he's here as secretary of the International Affairs of Sao Paulo City Hall in Brazil. Thank you very much. And you will actually share with us. Trust me, very interesting presentation. I already heard him talking throughout these days in the various panels of the Commission for Social Development. You will talk about good practices at local level.
True.
Lessons from your city, Sao Paulo. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind presentation and for visiting our city. You're all invited, of course. So I would like, on behalf of my mayor, Mr. Bruno Covas, he's not available to be here due to health issues. I'd like to take the opportunity to be a part of this panel and greet my colleagues, Professor Bahira Trask, Shaniqua Holiday, Matthew Windram, Molly Girk, and Daniela Bass. So I represent the city of São Paulo, which is the largest city in Brazil, a very dynamic economic with 12 million inhabitants, which is part of a metropolitan region with 21 million people. Very hard to manage, but we are trying to. In São Paulo, 3.3 million people live in inadequate conditions, inhabiting 1,800 slums and 2,000 irregular places, which is a consequence of a fast urbanization process that occurred in the last century. From those, according to our census that we did in 2019, 24,000 people are homeless people. We understand the need to implement public policies connected with families because it is through the family circle that behavior, culture, education, and values are passed along. We believe the family is the family that works, so that's our definition of family. Each one can choose the one they prefer. In order to guarantee the basic housing right, São Paulo City Hall created the project Família em Foco, which means like family in focus, which has a main goal to ensure the protection of families in situation of vulnerability, contributing to their social inclusion. The project is responsible for providing housing, food, medical care, and professional training. There are 4 units in São Paulo in different neighborhoods with a total of 210 vacancies for families. In Brazil, the access to housing is a constitutional right, and it is an obligation of national, regional, and local governments to guarantee that as the basis of other fundamental rights such as health and education. As a palliative policies, São Paulo has 24 hours reception centers integrated with the services of the Social Assistance Reference Center, the Specialized Reference Center for Social Assistance, and the Specialized Reference Center for the homeless population. In addition, we have centers specialized in assisting women and elderly people that live on the streets. Therefore, prevention policies are an important way to avoid major problems over time, and City Hall has been actively working to prevent and reduce the number of homeless families. For example, the challenge of access to housing is directly linked to the employment conditions of each citizen, who, due to low wages or even lack of work, are subjected to unhealthy housing conditions, occupying for the most part peripheral and watershed areas. Thus, solving the problem of access to housing goes through a historical path that runs throughout fundamental problems such as access to education and income distribution. In order to solve this problem, it is necessary to integrate different actions through the sectors of public administration. As foreseen in our strategic master plan, the first step to be taken is the realization of urban planning and the regulation and land occupation, taking into account existing buildings in the city, bringing the population closer to urban center and their workplaces. Besides that, it is important to remove families from risky areas and water sources, favoring investments to reduce the housing deficit, and ensuring the provision of basic services for the well-being of all citizens. Seeking to solve the housing deficit faced today by the City of São Paulo, City Hall has carried out intersecretary work to guarantee access to housing for the low-income population. One of the main programs in the city is social leasing, whose premise is to serve families without financial conditions to acquire their own housing, even if subsidized by the municipality. Seeking to meet this demand, the city has acted since 2004, serving 937 families since then. Under the same mold of social leasing, in 2019, the first project was delivered to exclusively meet the demand of the homeless population, which are in a situation of extreme social vulnerability and really need our help. Another example is the housing program called Come In, Pode Entrar in Portuguese, launched by the City Hall in 2019. For 2020, the initial phase of the program, which was developed entirely with resources from the municipality. The investment will be around 1 billion reais, an amount that will provide the construction of around 10,000 units. During the planning of the program, the distribution of resources was established, and it will occur by this modality. So 40% will be destined to families registered by the Metropolitan Housing Company, and families who were removed from risky areas or due to urban interventions. 40% for projects developed by organizing entities of housing project, and 20% for social lease or letter of credit projects. In addition to that financial resources, so 5% of the units built will be allocated for people with disabilities, 5% for elderly people, and 5% for women assisted by the protective measure provided by the law called Maria da Penha, which is for women that suffered abuse. Beyond the inclusion of minority groups in the social housing project, the financing of the program Come In meets a demand from citizens to provide access to housing for groups without sufficient financial resources to prove income in the regular real estate market, serving families with income up to 3,000 reais and enabling the financing of the property for up to 30 years. 1 minute, I'll just jump ahead. So I would like to finalize highlighting that our actions and projects are strategically aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030, so we seek to repair past actions and build projects based on the principle of leaving no family behind, an ethical condition for the city of São Paulo. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
So important, prevention, and how powerful the role of local authorities can be to implement what is decided, as I say here in the Sputnik, in the ivory tower, sometimes called by others, but actually then what happens here, if it is brought back to the grassroots level, and from there we move up again, etc., it's like in nature, right? It goes back and forth, and that's the way to improve things. There is a symbol. I have to learn how to draw that symbol. It's a Chinese symbol, and it can mean, as I said it also yesterday, I think, during a lunchtime, during a lunch I was invited to. In Chinese, it can read like challenges and opportunities. It has got, it depends on how we use it. The same symbol has two meanings. So there are many challenges we have been discussing today, but I saw that out of these challenges, many of you representing very important organizations have also tried to find opportunities to actually improve and overcome those challenges. So thank you very much for bringing here not only the problem, but actually already some pragmatic activities and solutions that are taking place. And again, the role of local authorities is really key. We have some time now for interacting together, asking questions, sharing things. Let's have some kind of dynamic conversation without taking too much time, so to allow everybody to explain things and share. But I would like first Renata maybe to tell us a little bit more about the possibility to have reports, and if you can say it now, so that then, thank you.
Organized in cooperation with the stakeholders that we work closely with. So just to acknowledge that UN Women, IFFD, the NGO Committee on the Family, and the UNANIMA were our partners on this event, and they also introduced us to other speakers that we are grateful to have, and also to acknowledge UN Women and mention that there are reports available, some reports. And the topic of their progress of the world's women is on families in a changing world. So I think it's a very good sign. I think UN Women is tackling this issue of families. And I would also like to tell you that there is an event at 1:15 in this room organized by our major stakeholder, IFFD. It's a very interesting event. It is called Our First Home, Adequate Housing and Family Formation. So at 1:15 here, I'm sure many of you would be interested. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. Thank you very much. So, who wants to have fun that makes this become red? Yeah, come on.
I'm Robert Brent, Professor of Economics at Fordham University, and many of the speakers have mentioned economics, but it clearly has a very large role. In your introduction, you talked about inequality, and that's just connecting some of the dots. You know, why do you get gentrification? How can people afford all these houses? Because of inequality. How come there's all this tourism? Why all the money? People can carry around this tourism. So, and just a little comment. You know, you're going to, as a cause of inequality, obviously you can't have tax cuts. You can't have tax cuts with the rich paying less and less, and therefore having more and more economic power. So the questions I have are not on economics. They're in response to your question about aging, because with aging comes dementia. So there's going to be more and more of dementia. And I think you need a little bit more about mental illness. We had deinstitutionalization, which actually was a misnomer, because they moved out from the state mental hospitals, went out into the community, became homeless, and then were arrested, so they ended up in prisons, another institution. So that's a lot of the crime aspects in that. But I wonder if you could focus on the mental illness, either the major types or related to aging.
Thank you. Another one, definitely we needed to develop better policies. So this is a topic that can be brought to the attention of member states when they gather here again. And the civil society can play an amazing role in making sure that the countries where they work in bring this to the table of policies. Others? Yes? Okay. The first lady and then the following one. Yes, you and then the next one. Yeah.
Okay, I was especially interested in the comment by UNANIMA that families contribute to social progress and can be the key to finding most of the potential to break the cycles. And so I'm with United Families International, and we definitely believe that. I'm very interested in what they have found as the way families can be the key to breaking the cycle. That's UNANIMA.
Thank you for an excellent panel, amazing services being done. My question is kind of similar to the previous one, prevention. What can be done to secure the bond between the mother and father so that the fathers are providing, engaged, and we prevent breakdown that leads to vulnerability of women and children?
Thank you. I will let the speakers and panelists intervene here. Definitely, culture plays a role, religion plays a role, values play a role, legislation of each country plays a role when it comes to your question. So, first round. Thank you.
Well, I can say in the context of family violence, Safe Horizon has a new program called Safe Way Forward. And so that program actually treats the person that caused harm as well as the person that was harmed in different settings. And so they're both the clients of that program. And so that's a way to address some family breakdown in the context of domestic violence.
Anything to the other question? No. Yes, please, Bahira.
I'd just like to add that economics, like the gentleman said, plays a huge role because there's a lot of research that when families are stressed through economics, if one of them loses their job, if both of them lose their job, if they don't have enough money, it causes conflict, and that causes these rifts in families.
And you might wish also to say which answer you're providing to which question.
So I'd just like to directly address the question to UNANIMA on what we've found through our research. So in our research, we've looked at good practices, especially across the country case studies. And from this, a lot of the good practices, they are working with each of the family members. I would just like to highlight one good practice, which is Sophia Housing Dublin. They work with each, housing with supports, but work with each of the members of the family from the parents to the children in different ways. Now, ensuring we're working with everyone within the family is ensuring or at least contributing to breaking the cycle of not only poverty but intergenerational homelessness. So that's something that has come up repetitively, and we'd like to advocate for housing with supports that address everyone.
Matthew or Luis? Matthew, maybe?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Luis, Ale.
So talking about the families are what work, so sometimes what we consider a breakdown, maybe a divorce, that's the family that's going to work. Mm-hmm. So talking about specifically about women that suffered abuse, besides the units for housing that we provide, we also have a project to implement income for that woman, because sometimes she cannot leave the house. So the family is stressful in that way, but she cannot leave because she has no proper income. So we have a project in partnership with the private sector that provides jobs for women that were abused in order that they can have their dignity back, their financial independence, and they can leave that abuser and take the child elsewhere and work as a proper family should be. So even divorced families, maybe that's the one that works. So we are trying to attend those two.
Sure. Just 2 quick points. To the Fordham Economist, I don't think we would take an organizational position on tax policy per se, but I think the way we would put it is we believe that programs like ours, and of course, others here, have to be adequately resourced in such a way that we can help the people who may have been gentrified out of their neighborhoods or suffered in other ways. So I'll leave it to you and others to judge whether it takes higher taxes to ensure that, but we do want that ensured. As far as keeping fathers engaged, as someone back there asked, that's kind of exactly what we specialize in. And what I would say to that is many of the men we've dealt with have been failed by society. They've been failed by our educational system. They've been failed by a system that incarcerates for nonviolent drug offenses, for instance, primarily minority communities. So I think in giving the tools and the vocational training and the education generally, like high school equivalency and so on, sets them on a course in which they can begin to reunite with their families, and they'll have the dignity of work, the habits of work, these kinds of things. Because at bottom, oftentimes, no matter what they may have done, they want the same thing as many of us, and that's to be good fathers to their children or sons to their mothers. So I think we're giving those kinds of tools, and hopefully it can be a model for others, and some are already doing some of the same work.
Thank you. Youth wants to be heard, and there are some young people down there. I think they asked to take the floor. Yes, you are one. Not wearing my glasses. So for me, everyone here is below the age of 18. You're all young.
From UN Women, and it was really a pleasure to be involved in the event with Renata and Daniela, so thank you so much. I think everyone has spoken very eloquently about what an important issue this is, and I also wanted to give another plug for UN Women's flagship report, Progress of the World for Women, which focuses on families in this edition. The report brings together a huge amount of data from around the world to show the diversity of families over time and in different regions, and calls for governments to put in place a family-friendly policy agenda that can really advance women's rights and gender equality for different kinds of families. And I think family violence was one of the issues that the report takes up, with this idea that families are often a place of love and support and nurturing, but they can also be a place where women are most likely to face violence and discrimination. So I think that the issues that Shaniqua has raised are so important. I will say that housing is not an issue that came through very strongly in our report, and I think that's a really big gap. I think perhaps because it's perhaps not been so well researched, and I think the research that we've heard about from UNANIMA and from Professor Trask, I think is really incumbent on you and women to look into that. So thank you so much. I had two questions. One for Shaniqua, which was I'm aware that LGBT communities face particularly high rates of homelessness, and I just wondered if there are particular measures that you take within Safe Horizon to meet the needs of LGBT women. And for Professor Trask, I was wondering, that you spoke very eloquently about this problem of financialization of housing and the fact that governments are not recognizing housing as a human right, which it is. And I just wondered, I know that you sort of ran out of time, but I'd just be really interested to know, are there any governments at local or national level that are really taking that issue seriously in terms of increasing affordable housing and reining in some of these problems of kind of financialization and so on?
Thanks, Laura. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for helping to coordinate our presence here. So Safe Horizon makes grave efforts to house women of all different groups. We have LGBT affinity groups that come together to address the needs of that particular group. We have a Streetworks program that's heavily involved in that particular group, and I think that we could definitely talk about increasing programming for that particular group.
Thank you.
I unfortunately had to rush through. At the end, I have a slide that has about 10 examples of different places around the world, and there are many different approaches. There are approaches at the state policy level in terms of regulating, zoning, that sort of thing, but there are also a lot of public-private partnerships. You're particularly seeing that in Europe, in places like Germany, Denmark, Norway, where the city government comes together with local real estate construction companies, that sort of thing, trying to build housing, trying to create new employment opportunities. It has to be a multi-level approach. It's not a single factor solution at all. And of course, in different parts of the world, you have different issues going on. So this business of over-tourism, for example, in Italy, they're starting to address it. In Venice, in Portugal, they're starting to address it. In Lisbon. So you have many different approaches going on, and I'd be happy to talk to you more about it then. Thank you.
Maybe some of this very rich information, if the panelists agree, could be also posted on our website. No, Renata, we could coordinate that. I think that we all deserve at least 20 minutes to go and wash our hands, eat a bite, drink a little bit of water, and be back here at 1:15 sharp. So I thank you all very much. It has been a joy. Thank you. Thank you.